Hey there, my name's Pete and I like pictures. I've been asked to make some videos about the tools of Lightroom and some more, well, to-the-point videos, and of course, I'm happy to do so. So these are some basic things, and let's start with two very, very, very important tools that we have in Lightroom, and that is the gradient filter or the graduated filter and the radial filter, and both filters are basically the same. They're both have just different shapes. What do these filters do? Well, first of all, let's take a look at the graduated filter. If we click on it, we have a lot of sliders. We have even some presets that you can use. And we also have a color tab, which is very, very interesting, but we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. So one of the most important things to know probably about these tools, and that is something that threw me off in the beginning, is that if you open the tools and you change the sliders, and you don't do anything, and just close the tools and open it again, then these changes you made are now default. So I can close it and I can open it and the sliders stay the same. We can reset that by holding down the Alt key and clicking on Reset and close again, and we'll open them again. So I'll show you the difference. These are the defaults, and I'm dragging up a gradient in that case. I will talk about what these things do in a minute, and I'll change a slider, and I'll close it, and then I'll open it again, and we're back at the defaults. So if we have created a gradient and then changed the sliders, these changes will not be default. Only if we open the tool, change something, close it again, then this change will be default. With that having said, we'll reset that, close it, and we'll delete, and see we're back at the default, delete the gradient. So that is with all or almost all tools. So changing anything before you applied the tool will make these changes to default. So we can create a gradient, and you see, as an example, we'll change the exposure, and you see it creates, well, a gradient. That's the name. So the effect that we create by changing those sliders fade. So we can make the fade smaller or bigger, depending on how big the gradient is. So you see, exposure is probably the most used slider of the gradient tool, and it's a bit like a graduated ND filter. If you know these things, those glass filters or plastic filters that you put in front of your lens to darken certain areas of your photo, used very often to, like here, darken the sky so that we don't have blown out sky. And this is some sort of the digital equivalent to that. But of course, if we have a blown out sky, so there's no information left, we don't get back any information, that is because it's not in the file. So that is probably the most common use of that filter. And I will even use that here because the sky is a bit too bright in the original picture. And we see it was a very overcast day, so we have no real blue sky. And I want to have a blue sky, so I can add actually a color to it. Like we make a blue sky, so we can create a blue sky if we don't have a blue sky. But that is, of course, not the only thing. We can now either close the tool, or we can just activating it again, and we can change that anytime. So that is really cool thing with Lightroom. All of the editing is non-destructive. So we can change everything to our liking at any point during the time we're working on that picture. So, but we can either close that thing and make a new one, or we can click on new and we see the defaults are back there. And I want to darken the foreground a bit so that the viewer's attention is more drawn to the zebras themselves. And this is a shot, by the way, I made a couple of years ago in Tsavo East National Park in Kenya in Africa. And that is the way that I use the graduated filter and the radial filter most of the time to guide the viewer's attention into a photo. So I darken parts or I lighten parts or I change parts of the picture so that I can really guide the viewer's eye into the photo. So yeah, we darken that foreground a bit. We can also change the white balance. It's like in the basic tab, we have that white balance slider, temperature and tint, and we have that here as well. So we can maybe make the grass a bit more yellowish. If we want to darken it a bit more. And we also have a contrast slider, so increase the contrast, make the highlights a bit brighter, shadows a bit darker. If we want to increase the clarity, that's probably too much. Increase or decrease the saturation of that certain area. And we also have sharpness, noise, moire, and defringe. Sharpness, I guess, speaks for itself. We can sharpen the picture or the part of the picture. Noise reduction. And I'll talk about moire and defringe in a different video. So just that you know that these things are in here as well. So what can we do now? I think I want to guide the viewer's attention a bit more here because it's a bit too bright for my taste here. So I can darken these areas. And you see, of course, that a bush in the foreground is a bit too dark now. The shadows get darkened a bit more. So I can lighten the shadows a bit so that it's not too obvious. And by the way, if one gradient is activated and I can drag up a new gradient, the same settings are applied to that new gradient. Very useful. So we're done with that. And the same applies for the radial filter. We have the same sliders here, and we also have a color, etc., etc. But we also have a feathering amount. What does that do? We can create an ellipse here, for example. Well, we have a feathering and an invert mask. I'm talking about that in a minute. So we can change the exposure, and you see it creates some sort of a vignette. So we see now the effect of the sliders is on the outside of the ellipse. And what does feathering do? You guessed it. If we set the feathering to 0, we have a very sharp edge. And if we increase the feathering, we get a very soft transition. So we can really create very soft vignettes. And if we want the these sliders, these changes affect the inside of the ellipse, we can just invert the mask by doing so. Very useful, but I want them on the outside, of course. So that's basically it. Very useful tool, or very useful tools for creating things, for guiding the viewer's attention. I guess this is the main thing for these two tools, to really, well, to darken, brighten, to color parts of the picture, to to guide the viewer's attention, I guess. That's how I use it most of the time. Another thing with we close that, with the radial filter is if we hold down the Shift key, we can create a circle. And if we release the Shift key, we'll have an ellipse again. So we can create really circles or ellipses. The thing with all of these tools is if we want to zoom in while we're working with the tool, we can do that by simply holding down the Alt key, the space bar, I'm sorry, to hold down the space bar, and you see the cursor changes, and we can zoom in by clicking and zoom out again by clicking again. Very useful if we want to zoom in. We don't have to close the tool to zoom in. And the same thing applies, for example, if we can drag that circle around if we want to, and by holding down the Alt key, if we're zoomed in, and hold down the space bar. It's a bit late. I'm sorry. It's past midnight. We can drag the picture. We don't drag the circle. We drag the picture. Also very useful if we want to check parts of the picture that are not visible when zoomed in. Releasing the holding down the space bar and clicking again will zoom out. Okay, that's a very, I guess, speaks for itself. No further explanation needed, but there's even more to, especially the radial filter, because it can be used in portrait retouching. Very, very good, and I'll show you that with a different picture. So this is a portrait I made for an assignment, and well, it's one of those portraits I didn't use for the assignment because well, the angle is a bit very weird, but I still think it's good to show you a very cool thing that you can do with the radial filter. And this is my cat in the background. He's sometimes a bit annoying. So we zoom in on the eyes, and I want to improve the eyes. You see there's not much retouching done with that shot. Actually, not at all. Bit brightened it a bit, I guess. So we'll click on the radial filter and we'll just drag up an ellipse, and we twist it, really drag it into the eye, because I want to brighten the eyes here. And we can do that. Most of the time I first try to do it with, and you see it applies on the outside, so we invert the mask. And most of the time I try to do it first by just increasing the highlights, but in that case it doesn't really work. So we'll increase the exposure as well, and a bit of the clarity. So I think this works pretty well. And we want to apply the exact same thing on the other eye. And of course we could just memorize the changes we made, but much easier, right click and duplicate and just drag that new created radial filter over to the other eye and adjust it. Most of the time we have to decrease the brightness a bit because the other eye is in the shadows, and so we hold down the spacebar, click and zoom out, click on done, and so we see the eyes are much brighter. That's a very cool thing. And of course we can also create a vignette if we want to darken it a bit, maybe even color it. I want to color it, give it a greenish tint, and put the feathering down a bit, and because we don't want to have green skin, change it, twist it a bit, drag it up a bit here as well. So that's basically it. Gradient filter, radial filter, very useful tools. Bye. Till next time.